Hi, good morning.
Right. So I hope everyone can hear me. So can you? Okay, great. Right, ladies and gentlemen, warm greetings and welcome to the first out of five webinars jointly organized by the Washington Schools Network and the Sustainable Sanitation Alliance, or SuSanA, Working Group 7 on WASH and Institutions. This specific session is entitled Understanding the Education Sector from the Perspective of WASH. Please be reminded that this session is going to be recorded and made available via the WINS Network website. If you do not consent to these conditions, please make use of the chat function. I am Margaret Lim of the WINS Network Secretariat, and I have the pleasure of opening the session for today with a brief introduction of the WINS Network. I'm also joined by my colleague, Frederick Madrid, who is also supporting the coordination of this event. So over the next hour, you may see either of us posting reminders and or responding to questions that will pop up in the chat. So now please allow me a couple of minutes to introduce the WINS Network and to provide an overview of the webinar series. So the WINS Network is a global interagency network that is working towards the improvement of WASH services in schools across the globe. And in order to do that, we facilitate exchange of experiences and alignment of strategies of various organizations in support of governments' WINS programs. The network is steered by the following four group members, which you see on your screen, namely UNICEF, GIZ, WaterAid, Save the Children, the WHO UNICEF Joint Monitoring Program, or the JMP, London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, Emory University, and UNESCO. So the WINS Network the WINS Network's activities are focused on the working streams, which you may also see on the screen, and I will read out: advocacy, policy and system strengthening, monitoring and reporting, um, research and evidence building, gender, inclusive MHH, WINS programming, knowledge management, capacity development, learning, and exchange. So you are all invited to continue exchange with the WINS Network, either as a member or a partner organization. There is no active engagement required, but is, of course, most welcome. Basically, you will be part of our mailing list, and you will receive regular updates on the WINS Network's activities. If there are events, there will also be calls for contribution, events such as this one, which are also not mandatory, but could be a platform to share best practices within your area of work. You may check out the website, winsnetwork.org, for more information. Also on the website, you may find upcoming and past events on WINS and a collection of relevant materials and information about WINS, including global guidance documents and resources, publications in peer-reviewed journals, and a Washington Schools and COVID-19 knowledge map, among others. If you have any question throughout the session, please feel free to place them in the chat, or you can also opt to make use of the raise hand function, and we will then unmute you once the opportunity to once the timing to address questions arise. So, but when you place them in the chat, we'll address them as soon as we can. Because at this point, I will now move on to the next slide, where I will pass the baton to our session moderator. Please allow me to introduce Belinda Abraham, who I think many of you here are likely already familiar with. She will guide us through the informative and interactive session ahead of us. Belinda is an international development specialist with over 20 years of experience in the WASH and education sectors in sub-Saharan Africa and Southeast Asia. She has worked with UNICEF, GIZ, and a number of international NGOs in 7 countries. Belinda is currently working with German-based NGO Viva Conagua and is also supporting the WINS Network Secretariat. So from Manila, Philippines, I now hand over to you, Belinda, in Berlin. Thank you very much.
Hi, thank you. What a nice introduction, and good morning from Berlin. And I'm glad to see a lot of different names. Actually, Taber from Phnom Penh. What a pleasure. Great to connect with a lot of different people. And thank you for joining. So can we go on to the next slide, please? Yeah. So this session is one out of 5 sessions that we will be doing. It is really, again, to engage globally. And then we got these great technology. So engage globally over the issues on Washington schools. And it is called Chat, Listen, and Exchange. And that's exactly what I want to stress, the chat function. Please use it. If you have insights, comments, questions, use the chat function. This is really going to be interactive. And as part of our reporting too, we will be keeping all the chat recordings and will be part of the deliberations. So it's definitely a way for you to engage. I am very pleased to introduce 4 panel members, and I would say the 4 panel members are joining me to support me on a discussion that was had some time back, where we were actually questioning the issue of how do we better engage with the education sector for Washington schools? How do we engage with them so that we have long-lasting institutionalized change? And then this discussion led to actually the concept. So I do really thank Mateus and Scat team, who really were the ones who kind of pushed me on to do this. So if we can go to the next slide. I would like to introduce our panel. So all the way in Vientiane, Laos, joining us is Huong. Huong is a development economist. She's got more than 20 years experience in Asia and Africa. She is currently the SMV WASH program coordinator in Laos. So Huong, welcome. And can we go to the next slide? We've got Justina. Justina is joining us from Kenya. She holds a Bachelor of Education degree in special needs. She as well is currently doing her PhD in Education Administration. She is from the Ministry of Education, and she is working under the Teacher Service Commissions, and she is an accountant. So she's not calling from the capital, maybe she can correct me on this, but she works out of Kitui County. So she's working at subnational level. And I think that perspective is really important as we talk about wins. Next slide, please. So joining us, and Hilda just joined us, so maybe the moderators can pin her. Perfect. Hilda is joining us from Ghana, the beautiful Gold Coast, as the former Gold Coast. She is a former country, actually her background is adult education, and she is a former country coordinator for Football for WASH. And I think actually Justina and Hilda, you have something in common there because you both worked in the Football for WASH. She is also a co-founder of Beyond the Goalpost and Asaya Foundation, which you'll tell us more about. And to round off our panelists going around the globe, next slide, please, is Ana Marica. Ana Marica is closer to me here in Berlin. She's in the Netherlands. She has an MSc in water management and sanitation engineer. So she is an engineer, a rare breed at that. and she's been working in this sector for almost 3 decades, or over 3 decades. And she has worked in developing national, regional policy standards, guidelines. She's actually currently working in Ghana, and so great to have her here with us today. So if we can go on to the next slide. And maybe panel members, if I can ask you to put your mics on, or to put on your mics and also your video so we can see you. If you cannot, if there's an issue with it, then yeah, great. So great, Ana Marica, welcome. Justina, thank you very much. Maybe Hilda and Hung, thank you. And great, Hilda. So maybe just mute yourself for the conversation because we're getting a little bit of but I'm going to start with you, Hung. Can you tell us a little bit about your work in Washington schools, just to kind of as a bit of an icebreaker and sort of set the stage? And then as well, tell us something that you found, that you've done in your work that you found a proud achievement, I should say. Yeah.
Hello everyone, my name is Hung. I'm calling from Vientiane, Laos, PDR. My experience with WASH in the last 10 years, I've been working with the UNICEF and Ministry of Education in various countries in Uganda, Ghana, Cambodia, Mongolia, Myanmar to develop guidelines and standard for wash in school. Also, as a program manager in different countries, I've been working with a team of different advisors implementing wash in school program in the field. What I would say as achievement, I can't say that it's called an achievement, but one of the things I've got a lot of positive feedbacks from local partners is that they enjoy the process of bringing in multiple stakeholders to discuss about issues, problems, gaps, and together we come up with guideline plans, action plan, or implementation plan, that at the end of the day, when you look at the document, you can say that everyone is involved. And they also say that we do this because of this and that and that. So I think that's one of the things that I feel we've been doing well. It's strong sense of ownership through the multiple participatory workshop or consultative workshop with local stakeholders, so that bring out the local problems, local solutions.
Great.
Thank you.
So I guess, yeah, thanks, Huang. So I guess when we were coming to conversation, it would be great to hear a little bit more from you on how to do that and how to really engage local stakeholders together and your experiences on that. So thank you for sharing. It feels a little bit like an interview, but it's not meant to be. Yeah. So next, so Justina in Kenya, can you tell us a little bit about your work in Washington schools, just to give a context of the work you've been doing, and then also if you can tell us some things lately that you're really proud of and why?
Hi, everyone. My name is Justina Pereira from Kenya. My experience and work in WASH in schools is first and foremost, I have been advocating for a WASH in different organizations working around schools, because leaving children out of what we are doing is leaving part of the community out of the implementation. I have also been coordinating schools within the county and also in the country in WASH promotion. Have been doing proposal writing to request for funding to support WASH in schools in different sub-counties in my county. I've been involved in monitoring of the WASH project in the schools. I've also worked with different partners to support WASH in schools, depending on the activities that they are supporting in schools. I've been supervising the promotion, construction of sanitation facilities, training and capacity building of different stakeholders in WASH promotion. I've also been organizing for WASH forums for different organizations doing WASH in schools, depending on the kind of support they are giving to the schools. I've also participated in development of the WINS strategy for schools in Kenya. And I've been also organizing for exchange visits of teachers and other stakeholders to visit other implementing counties and sub-counties in the country. So I've really enjoyed working with within the WASH spectrum, because I am happy when children are healthy, and also I love working with the children, and I really wish to have a country which is disease free, especially diseases caused by hygiene and sanitation and water issues. Thank you. Back to you, Belinda.
Yeah, thank you, Justina. And Justina, I think from a perspective of somebody who's in government, the fact that you've worked with so many different counterparts and in so many different capacities, I think you'll bring a lot to the discussion later on as well. Okay, Hilda in Ghana. Thank you very much. Hilda, briefly, can you tell us what has been your work in Washington schools and also achievements that you're very proud of?
Hello everyone. Yes, I worked in washing schools as and brought in my rich experience with sports. So, Football for Wash is mainly the project I worked on washing schools, and ours was to increase access to wash in schools across the country. We in total worked in close to 600 basic schools across the country. We only didn't work in 3 district regions in the country. So in terms of access, we created a lot for the basic schools in the country. What we did was we used the unique strategy of football to expand WASH in schools by using sports to energize the boring subject of WASH in schools.
Yeah.
And through that, we were able to excite the sector to do more, and especially for the children to adapt WASH in their various schools. My greatest achievement is the creation of access of WASH across board. Even in schools where they had the infrastructure, but the behavior change was very slow. Our project was able to expand the reach of the children, of WASH to the children, but also speed up the adaptation of the WASH practices in schools. And this I'm so proud of. The other thing we did was the implementation of WASH was expanded to the community to create sustainability, and our engagement with community leaders beyond school, the PTA or the school management was also critical. And this brought a lot of sustainability issues on board, especially in the rural areas. So this is what I'm proud of. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Hilda. And as we go again on along with the discussion, it'll be great to see how things like Football for WASH and initiatives like this can be institutionalized into the system so that it becomes part and parcel of the government's approach to make it lively, fun, joyful approach to which us in Viva Con Agua know very much about, to make it lively so the kids get engaged and people get engaged. And so rounding off the panel, Ana Marica, I will ask you the same questions again. Related to your work in Washington schools, briefly and concisely, and as well achievements you're proud of and why. Thanks. And just unmute yourself. Unfortunately, you have to unmute. Yeah. Yeah, great. Oh.
Yeah, okay. I want to be brief, and as some of you know, my experience working in Washington schools goes more than 25 years back. And it really started when I was working in peri-urban areas in Honduras, in the capital, Tegucigalpa, where we were doing a great project as UNICEF, where I was working for at the time. And the people I was working with came to me and they said, we cannot just work in the community. We need to include the school. And, at that point, together with them, and really mainly led by them, we developed a methodology called Healthy House, Healthy School, Escasal, in Spanish it's called. And this has become a methodology that's being used by millions of people or being beneficiaries in the whole of Central America. So I think, the one I started with is maybe the one I'm most proud of, yeah, because it really integrated schools into the whole hygiene promotion activities in the communities. Ever since I continued working for UNICEF, I was coordinating the first Washington Schools big global program, which started in 1999. I developed a booklet on child-friendly designs for school facilities. Also in the same period, I developed a toolkit on Washington schools for the World Bank. I developed a lot of global documents for UNICEF on Washington schools. Ever since, I was more focused on the development of national strategies. Yeah, I developed strategies for Bangladesh, for Ghana, and for Jordan. Yeah, I mean, I was part of the team. What I'm quite proud of, I recently visited Ghana like a month ago, I think, yeah, in January, 2 months ago. And I was in this very remote school in the north of Ghana. And I see there the booklet of the facility management plan that we developed for the WASH in School strategy in Ghana in the year 2014 being used, being present, being shown in this very remote school. And I think then you can say, okay, we have successfully implemented something. Thank you.
Amazing, amazing. Yeah, and again, as we go on our discussion, how do we reach that we can find a booklet or the initiatives in the most remote school get there? What is that process? There's a lot of nice questions on the box. Welcome those. There's a question to you, Justina, so perhaps maybe you can take that via chat. Welcome Angela as well from Lusaka and others. Thank you very much. So next slide, please. Yeah, so as we spoke about, and I'm going to have to put my glasses on now because I didn't realize the screen was so small. Yeah, so as we talked about, so this originally came, the idea of this came as a discussion of how do, as NGOs, particularly more focused on NGOs, who are working with Ministries of Education, how do we engage that our innovations can actually be institutionalized, can actually be sustained? And then as we were having this discussion, I started to realize that there's actually, in some ways, almost two parallel situation. And when we talk sometimes about we need to work in a systems or we need a systems approach, we sometimes forget to know that maybe we need to understand that system. Maybe we need to take a little time to understand that system. And when we understand that system, we're better able to engage. So in this, I had some reflections, and I'm going to go through a couple slides of reflections. I want you to also share your reflections in the chat box, and I will also bring back the panelists to reflect on them too. So on one side we have, and I'm being very general here with NGOs, I'm being general. Your NGO, your organization may not be like this at all. Yeah. Somebody's asking to see if we can make the slides bigger. We'll see if we can do that. If not, we can try to maybe share the link somehow. Okay, so but I'll try to read them out and they will be available afterwards. Okay, so just listen on Vicky. Okay, so on one side we have NGOs who work very much, I would say, decentralized, work with local partners, work in a decentralized fashion. On the other side, we have Ministries of Education, and again, I'm generalizing, which tend to be more centralized. So you've already got a bit of a conflict or a different interface there. NGOs tend to work with local actors. So we work with school directors and we work with communities and committees and local government at best, maybe at meso level. Whereas Ministries of Education often work with departments and centralized departments. You have also within, again, very generalized, when NGOs are writing lessons learned, we tend to keep the lessons learned to project partners, to, at best, external donors. They often do not go through the internal monitoring system, which Ministries of Education have. Ministries of Education have very complex, and Justina could probably speak to it, monitoring systems which go from schools to maybe districts to counties to national level, meso level to national level. And if you're not able to connect on that, you're missing some of the lessons learned being shared into the system. We've also got monitoring, which primarily is with the NGO teams, the health, public officials, public works, but it's not linked to the monitoring evaluation systems of Ministry of Education, which is often through the education information management systems. So, and that's the main kind of instrument that the ministry uses to actually monitor. And then you've got advocacy. Our advocacy with NGOs tends to be focused on community mobilizations, parents, schools, and communities. Whereas if you really want to get institutionalization, the advocacy has to go at higher levels, central levels, planning levels in the central part of the Ministry of Education. So you've got kind of two different things happening. And I've kind of tried to do this in the slide to show this. Next slide, please. So what are the implications of this? It means in terms of advocacy, there's missed opportunities if you're not advocating with central departments within the Ministry of Education. There's also potential missed opportunities for sharing analysis, lessons learned, because we are focusing or we're bypassing opportunities to do it with the planning or using the reporting systems. For opportunities for scale up, if projects are not aligned to those local and central level planning processes, again, you're missing opportunities as an NGO program or project. And resource allocation, because again, resource allocation is very much linked to planning, and planning is very much linked to more central level planning. So you tend to then have a situation where there's a lot of areas where there are missed opportunities. Let's go to the next slide. So what are some of the key points? And one thing that we like to do in the WINS network is work on what we call the enabling environment. It's a framework. Some of you might know it through the SWA building blocks. Other people know it more holistically in a sort of a system strengthening. It's similar, but basically we look at 4 or 5 different areas. Policy being one, budget and finance, monitoring, evaluation, capacity building, implementation arrangements, although it's not on this slide. So what does this mean? It means that in terms of policy arrangements, when working with Washington schools, key to this function is Ministry of Education. Ministry of Education is the lead. Bella shared with me recently that WHO's guidelines for school health clearly state Ministry of Education as the lead. So you must work through Ministry of Education if you want to see things stick. Budget and financing. Here I would like to say is that schools should be encouraged for doable actions. The assumption that budgets will come from state budgets, oftentimes if you're going through this kind of very centralized system, will take a long time. So if you do want to encourage sustained actions, you must encourage schools to mobilize funds. And I would be lovely to speak a bit more to Justina and Hilda about how they were able to do that, in adding income generation activities and those type of things as part of their WINS project. Monitoring and evaluation. Monitoring should be is very much a point to sustaining Washington schools. And I think more and more NGO actors and development partners should try to use and work through monitoring and evaluation as a means to sustain Washington innovations. So what does that mean? It means that encouraging self-monitoring, but also encouraging monitoring at meso and macro levels in the school. So trying to engage things that are important in the school to be measured and to be reported, because the more that they are reported, the more that they matter. And that also increases the awareness and the consideration. And lastly, capacity building. Capacity building needs to take a systems approach. We talk about it a lot. This means building support both at local levels and national level as well. So with that, that's just some general reflections. Again, highlighting the fact a very centralized ministry versus a very decentralized NGO operations. How do we come together for sustained wins? Next slide, please. So I want to bring back 2 of our panel members to discuss a little bit of what I've said, have some reflections. I also welcome you to reflect as well. I see there is a hand, but we'll come first to Hung. Maybe Hung, if you can give me some reflections of what I've presented. And also, yeah, Hung, if you can just share some reflections on what was presented. If you agree, disagree, or you have another sort of approach to it. You're welcome. Hung.
Thank you, Belinda. Yes, talking about central level or national level and subnational level, it's connecting it is easier said than done. In many countries that I've been working, you can see that there are perfect policy, guideline, standards, everything in place. But when you go to the field, when you go to the school, even district health office, they may not even know about it. So this is one of the biggest challenges that we've experienced. Another thing I've seen is that the Washington schools specifically, the roles are scattered in many ministries, many departments, and it's very difficult to bring this together. Everybody, when you read on the policy, it makes perfect sense. But when you start to put it up on the wall, you see that everybody is doing monitoring. But what about construction of toilet? What about providing water? Nobody seems to have that role. So this unclear role responsibility with a lot of overlapping and big gap have been seen as big problems. And to bring national policy or strategy down to the subnational level requires a lot of efforts, requires dissemination of information, cascade training, and different activities. But normally, washing school is seen as a forgotten child. The Ministry of Education have so many other priorities: libraries, teachers' salaries, classroom, desk and chairs. So none of this has been factored in for WASH. WASH has rarely been included in the budget or in the discussions. So how do we bridge all these gaps to make sure that national strategy or policy for washing school are implemented at national level? It requires a lot of things. And I can go on for many minutes, but I think I'll leave it for others to talk.
Okay. Yeah. But great that you
Yeah.
raised some points on that. Justina, please.
Yes, I would like to point on the key points about the Minister of Education as a lead to wins. One, and first and foremost, the minister has very good policies on WASH in schools, but implementation is the problem. I can concur with what my friend has said about the Minister of Education having other priority areas other than WASH in schools. Because even if you look at the funding given to the schools for water and sanitation, it is very, very little that even the schools themselves are not able to manage what they have. So funding is a very big issue, and again, giving priority to WASH in schools is a secondary option for the ministry. Sometimes it's very hard to hear people discussing about WASH in schools, but they would discuss about curriculum implementation, about sports, about games, and about other things. But WASH is not given the weight it deserves as far as the ministry is concerned. The other thing is that on income generation, we have tried to introduce income generating activities for the schools to carry out to supplement what the government is providing, especially during this time of COVID-19. We introduced making of liquid soap in schools, where the schools would buy the soap from themselves, and from the households would also buy the soap from the schools, and children would buy the soap to wash their clothes and also use at home for hygiene promotion. And in some of the schools, they have really succeeded in this. Others were not able to sustain. Schools can also do income generating activities in vegetable growing. But the biggest challenge is provision of water. There is no adequate water for doing all these activities. So the challenge still remains in WASH promotion. The other thing is if this panel could be able to develop a strong forum, or where we can share how we do monitoring of the WASH implementation, developing common tools that we can use. We can also develop local tools for self-monitoring within the schools to help in knowing where we are, and the schools to be able to guide themselves apart from waiting for outsiders to come and do the monitoring. Then and capacity building, all the interventions, the watch in schools needs a system whereby we have a clear system on who should be involved in watch. Because if you talk about watch at the national level, and that information remains up there, it does not trickle down, then there is no implementation. So if we want to succeed in watch implementation, the information should trickle all the way from the national level down to the grassroots, involving everybody who is working around the schools. And I think this is going to take us somewhere. Let everybody be involved. The children, the parents, the teachers, the field officers, and the line ministries who are doing an activity within the locality of the school. Back to you, Belinda.
Yeah, thank you, Justina. I think you've kind of hit the nail on the head on certain things. and both of you have the terms that the need to have guidelines and things implemented and not implemented, but actually disseminated. But more importantly, that schools can be encouraged to do doable actions. And if those doable actions can be integrated into their local monitoring system, that's something that can help. So maybe we can go on to the next slide. I do see some hands up. We will bring you in, don't worry. So I just want to sort of round up this kind of discussion to kind of throw in some insights. And I think it's very much linked to what both Hung and Justina have discussed. So I want to just say that we do need implementation both on downstream being at school level, if you want to call it, and upstream. There needs to be the dissemination of policies. At the same time, schools need to be encouraged. And so it's got to come together. That we all agree. And programs should invest in both of those. Yeah, we need to make sure that they're aligned to both local and central planning processes. So when you do something, you're aligned to both. We need to also look at how advocacy major, there's elections, local elections, actually, if appropriate, local councillors should be brought up with this issue. How can we bring up this issue so that, because parents, it's very important to parents. How can we create champions beyond school directors and find a balance to sustaining innovation beyond the school director level, and also financial sustainability with central level planning. Hong's point about different departments. We need to learn about Ministry of Education. You need to map out the different departments which are integral to the success of WINS. This means teacher training. Teacher training is not done with the school health department. Teacher curriculum development is not done with the school health department or a teacher. Teacher unions actually are oftentimes overlooked in WINS. So we have lots of different entry points, and we must consider the complexity of the Ministry of Education and working with the different departments to kind of continue to bring the issue of WINS and as entry points and as allies. We shouldn't work alone. And I think even as I work with an NGO, so and I've worked with NGOs before, creating allies and partners, development partners, whether you're linked to the education development sector groups, GPE, child-friendly schools in your country, because that's a good place to, on one level, you can be working at the school, but you're also able to work with other partners to advocate at central level, so the two come together. At UNICEF, I mean, Justina's worked with UNICEF, Hung has worked, I've worked, and Marika. UNICEF has also been a great partner in kind of doing that, GIZ as well. So work with other partners, share your information so that there is a link between what we're doing at school level and what is also happening at national level. And that double momentum will definitely move things forward. So going on to the next slide, and I would still encourage you to continue putting things in the chat, replying in the chat, and we will open it up a little bit because there's a quite a large number, which we're glad to, but we will open it up. So I want to go back to the panel on the questions. I'm going to start with you, Hilda. Given what we've talked about, some of the insights, what kind of advice would you give, and how, because you talked about how your program was reached 600 schools, was able to create quite a momentum. Hearing what I've said, hearing what Justina and Hung have said, what are some of your reflections on what advice, what should we be doing as WIN stakeholders to really encourage Washington schools? We know the pandemic, Bella's comment, the pandemic has made it really clear that Washington schools is important because schools don't open when there's no water and sanitation. But what can we do? What are some other suggestions that we could do as WINS champions? Hilda, and then to Anna Marika. Mm-hmm.
Yes, as has been said by the other panelists, Justina and co. By the way, hi Justina and Anna Marika. Nice to connect again. Hi. You know, the challenge of schools in WASH is multi-sectorial. And I will speak for Ghana because I know Ghana. You know, for example, the construction of school toilets or wash facilities are sometimes done by contractors who are contracted by other sectors in the in government who are not necessarily connected to education. And most of the time, the minimum standards are not followed when they are doing this stuff. And there is no consultation between the Ministry of Education, Ghana Education Service, and the contractors or the contracting bodies that implement those projects. So we need an alignment across board when we are having some of these projects in the schools. That is one of the ways that we can implement some of these projects that are that we do in our schools. We were lucky to have worked with Ministry of directly with Ministry of Education, but also with UNICEF, which is dealing with Ministry of Education at a higher level. So whatever is being implemented on the ground is taken into the discussion at the higher level to mainstream some of the best practices that come out. So it is important that we align to get organizations such as UNICEF, GIZ, and all that who have influence on board to be part of it to ensure that whatever best practices emanate from our activities are sent back to central government or are sent to policymakers to be able to mainstream them. We just mentioned internal generated funds or funds generated by school. We in Football for Watch for 10 years tried as much as we could to see how we can explore and implement activities that will generate income for schools. Just like Justina said, there are, funding going to schools, it's woefully inadequate. And this has to be looked at from central government, from local government, to ensure that schools are adequately funded for WASH. But the schools themselves can do things for themselves. And there should be flexibility for the schools to be able to implement some of these activities. We found a lot of especially at local government and national government level when we try to implement these activities. Maybe it's an fault that we probably didn't engage national government or the ministries and Ghana Education Service fully. But most of the projects that we implement have time limits. And sometimes engaging with government takes time. And so we are in a hurry to meet our deadlines, and therefore we are only able to do what we can. But as we do some of these things, local governments are always monitoring, schools, school management, local government are monitoring. So they should be able to take this to the next level to ensure these are discussed at policy level and see what can be implemented. With the government the internal generated funds activities that we carried on, I must tell you that finally one of the activities we did was the collection of plastics in schools, and then the sales of the plastics and proceeds go back to the schools for some support in the school expenditure. And as of today, I will tell you that this has expanded. I have moved on to other activities in my Asasa Foundation, where we are expanding the collection of plastics in school, and schools are generating income from it. Currently, we have about 150 schools that are program is going very well for schools. This, for me, something that we can pick up as we go along and explore some of the avenues that schools can go into to generate some income. There is no way government can provide all the needs of the school, especially WASH. And I say WASH and sports, but WASH is an orphan when it comes to
Absolutely.
so for
Thank
me, this is my insight.
Thank you
Yes.
very much, Hilda. That was excellent. And I think I think there was also some kind of agreement as well. Let me, Anna Marika, please take on from there. I would like to give you a couple minutes just to speak a little bit to what you've heard. And then we'll open it up to the wider group. Okay, please.
Yeah, I was making notes on how to respond to this. Then I saw that Hilda addressed almost all my notes. Because, and I want to reinforce what she has said. I think to repeat, okay, the relationship with the Ministry of Education, of course, is essential, and they are in charge of washing schools. But also, as an implementing partner, you have to know your position in this. Yeah. For some organizations like UNICEF or the big bilateral donors, the doors are just a little bit more open than when you're just an individual NGO, small, who covers, for example, 20 schools. So it's important to join forces. Yeah, and in some countries you have technical working groups on washing schools, and otherwise you might just go and connect with those partners which are more important and who can have access to the ministry in such a way that they are influential. Yeah. Just like Hilda said, this takes time, so you start investing in this before you really start applying to get funds. You need to invest in this, and not only at the Ministry of Education, but also at the district or the regional level. And that's why I met Hilda in Cape Coast in Ghana, where a lot of the implementation was being done through the municipalities. And the approach being used there was an area-wide approach. So practically speaking, all the schools that were connected to the piped water system were covered. What did it mean? It changed the norm of what is expected in schools. Yeah. So every school expected to have proper toilets. Every school expected to have a water system. Every school expected to have hand hygiene facilities. Yeah. So what you see is that if you have an area-wide approach, that this becomes the new norm in a certain area. And I saw that was very important, and that was very successful as well. Having said that, we talk about the Ministry of Education, but to go back, for example, to the example of Ghana, we saw there's an issue of paying water bills. Yeah? Schools have very limited budget often to pay water bills, and in the case of Ghana, the water company didn't want to give a special rate to schools, because they say if we give a special rate, people from the community will come, or you start selling the water. I mean, there are many reasons why they felt they shouldn't give a special rate. So what we are confronted with is that schools are sometimes being locked off from water because of not paying water bills. Yeah, those were the points that I had written down. Yeah.
Great. That's actually excellent. And I think Marge is in now, maybe to bring in some of the panel, some of the discussions that have been on the chat box. And I open it up for any of the panelists to respond to, or so maybe we can take two. We are really cognizant of time. We have 10 minutes left. So maybe we can take two hands to either to either make a point or question, and then we'll go sliding right to Bella.
So we see we have two hands raised here. So first we have Busa Danton. So would you like to say a few words to react to the panelists or to what has been presented? And now we will, yeah, you can switch on your mic now, and please raise your question or share your insights. Are you able to do that? Yeah, all right, please go ahead.
Hello to everyone. Thank you for inviting us in this interesting meeting, which is a very good cause. Yeah, I'm deeply interested in this, and I think if you can make a step to canalize this implementation in our country, because when I'm surrounding schools in DRC, most of them are not aware about WASH standard and what we can do with children in the school. I know that there is a program from UNICEF at the school, but it's not enough. It's not enough. With such initiative, it will be a very good thing to extend it and to reinforce it in order to get a very good result. Thank you for all of you and for the organization.
Thank you very much. And actually, that's a really good point around financing, that it's still, besides, the information, financing still continues to be a challenge. Do we want to take, then I think we're getting to the end. Do we want to take another question from the group, or do we want to take another question? Marge?
Sulaiman, would you now switch on your mic and give a brief insight, or please go ahead.
Right.
Right. Good morning, everyone. Hello.
Yes. Good morning. Please go ahead.
Okay.
Very briefly, elevator pitch.
All right. My name is Suleiman from Kano, Nigeria. I'm very much impressed about the WINS initiative. I have been a WASH practitioner. I teach in the school. I formed a club about this WASH, although now I'm a lecturer at the university. So one thing that baffles me is we have here in Kano, or in northern Nigeria in particular, a set of informal schools, that is the Almajiri system, of which I know UNICEF has been working hard in trying to improve their welfare. But one thing that is missing is their sanitation and hygiene aspect. I have formed a proposal, a very good proposal, in how to implement this WASH in the Almajiri schools. In fact, a sustainable one, because I tend to learn that most of these children come from the villages where open defecation is just seen as norm. So they come into the city or the urban environment with this unholy practice, and they keep on practicing it. And in most of these schools, there are no wash facilities. So
yeah, Solomon, actually, I'm glad that you bring up the point for two reasons. Number one, you bring up a point of the challenge of informal schools outside of what we quote unquote the system, and that system, even the Ministry of Education system. So that's challenge number one. The second challenge you bring up is how can you, as maybe a small scale initiative, try to actually raise the funds and generate the attention and interest again. So I'm going to let you keep those thoughts, because we will come back to them, and I'll actually ask Bella to look at those thoughts and think about them, because you're bringing up what I think many can address it. I think of the work that Taba is doing in wetlands in Cambodia, and it's always constant. It's a little bit of an advocacy, because on one side you have to be an advocacy, you have to be a champion who's constantly trying to break down the doors, find out who within the ministries and the districts who you can talk to. On the second side, it's mobilizing funds and attention. So you are not alone. There's many people on this call who feel the same way. But the question again will go back to, how can we work through the system to get that change? How can we take advantage of the government's funds? So I'm going to put in a question in the chat box. This is just a little fun question. If you can put that fun question up quickly so everybody can see the next slide. Yeah. This is a fun question. This is just to sort of get you guys thinking. So I want you to think if you hypothetically had to put 1 billion euros into something, what would you do and why? We want to put this all together because we're going to actually put a list together, and we're going to also see how this compares to some of the advocacy work we're doing. But with that said, I would like to go on to the next slide. So please put your questions in the chat box, or put your answers in the chat box. Can we go to the next slide, please? I want to give the last few minutes. Bella, it's a little shorter than we had intended, but I think there's a lot of time for you to reflect back on some of the key points that were brought up and maybe sort of tie everything in. I want to just introduce Bella Muntz. She is with Fit for Schools GIZ. She's a dentist by training, but is involved in school health promotion for a long, long time. And she is currently working as part of, since 2016, she's been working with the GIZ sector program, Sustainable Sanitation, and she co-leads with me in Working Group 7. So Bella, the floor is yours.
Yeah, hi, good morning. And very nice to see you all here. And thanks for these great inputs and the very interesting discussion. And I think what happened on the chat box, as well as the inputs coming from the group, and very interesting examples. I think just for me, what I find very interesting is this, the point really to look how, I mean, Belinda was stressing that all over, looking into the systems. What is the systems approach, and what does it mean if you are an NGO working with 20 schools? What can you do to support that? And I think what came out also clear is the system is really, it is, and put that straight on again, it's the task of the education sector. And this is also totally new. The education sector all over has not fully taken on that responsibility. But also now important again, washing schools is reported under SDG 4, and SDG 4 is education sector. And even these questions of access to drinking water, access to sanitation, which is 6162, they are still reported under the SDG 4A1. So important that this is really the task of the education sector, and that all of us have to see how can we best contribute to this. And as you say, if you are in, I was excellent examples from how approaches and how support has been there, but important to support the technical working groups within countries, and to really help to model these scalable solution. I think there was also this interesting question within the chat, what can we do to make a model? Yeah, I think when you make a model, it's also important to see, don't do too much, to do something where others can learn from and what the school can sustain. And if you look at it, what the school can sustain without the NGO, there will be not so much, there will be very slight interventions. But perhaps that's already good because that can be sustained. And it's very important within the education sector to highlight the point that it's the task of the education sector. So that's all the advocacy work, but also have at hand the SDG 4 and the responsibility of the education sector. And within the education sector, so important to get into, as you all mentioned, that what's the biggest issue is finance. But that will only be changed if there will be budget lines. And if you set up a monitoring system, there will always support the ministry in setting up a monitoring system. It will always be the point to see what are the targets, what we can reach. And only then, when there are targets and when there is a baseline, when you have figures, then they will put a price tag on it to improve the situation. Because only if there are budget lines, if responsibility is taken on by the Ministry of Education, then it will also come that they will establish budget lines. And I think all these are huge things which are sometimes so far away, but there's always a first step. There's always a way in walking and a way to do things, and perhaps learn left and right what others have done. And therefore, I highly encourage you. It feels very often like how to eat an elephant. It's huge. There's only one thing, bite by bite. And I think that's the way how we should also look at it and learn from each other. So please join the network, because there are a lot of material which can be shared. And I think exchange is what is so helpful for all of us. I think we all learned so much from exchange and from what others have done, because here and there we can take a shortcut. And with this, thank you very much for this excellent webinar, and hand over to March. Thank you.
Yeah, just before you join, Marge, I just want to again thank the 4 panelists. Thank you, Bella. Thank the 4 panelists for joining me. We could have talked probably for another 2 hours. It is really a short 1 hour quick chat. And I also want to thank everybody who was also in the chat box. So over to you, Marge. Thanks so much.
Yes, thank you, Belinda. Thank you very much. I echo Belinda's thanks for you, Bella, for the very inspiring closing words, and then to all our panelists for the rich and insightful discussions, and of course to Belinda for the excellent moderation. And to everyone, all of you here today for tuning in and for sharing your insights in the chat, and for staying until the end of the session. Just a few housekeeping reminders from my end before I finally let you go. So we would be very happy to hear from you on what your thoughts and feedback are on this session, as these would greatly help shape the upcoming sessions. We would therefore like to request you to please take 2 to 3 minutes of your time to respond to the short feedback form, which you may access via the URL or the QR code on the slide. And my colleagues will also place the link in the chat. We would greatly appreciate hearing from you, and yeah, many thanks in advance, and we look forward to seeing you in one or all of the future webinars. Please expect to receive an invitation for the next sessions, and we hope to connect with you again there. For now, please enjoy the rest of the day. Once again, on behalf of the WINS Network Secretariat, thank you very much for your time and attention. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Everyone, thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much for joining.